So in public speaking school, they train you to grab everyone's attention right off the bat with a bold and controversial statement. So this is mine. And some of you are laughing and some of you are sitting there in stunned silence, I can tell. But I'm actually being serious. So a little background, if you could tell from my accent, I'm not from here. I'm an American, I'm from California, I still live there actually, but I've been coming to Canberra regularly, and by regularly probably 7-8 times a year for the better part of 7 years, flying back and forth. So yeah, the airlines love me too. But when I first told everybody that I was coming to Canberra, especially Australians, especially Sydney-siders or people from Melbourne, they would usually roll their eyes or laugh because Canberra was a bit of a joke, right? Everybody talked about it being the land of, what do you call them, roundabouts and public servants, I guess. It's interesting that those are the two takeaways from Canberra. So I really didn't know what to expect when I first got here, but I didn't have very high expectations, I'd have to say. So I actually was quite shocked to find that it really is a beautiful place, and I love it. It's honestly my favorite city in Australia. Thank you. But before we get into all that and all the photos that Ingrid was talking about and stuff, I thought I'd provide a little context, because that's another thing you learn in public speaking school, right? Modernist architecture. So what is modernist architecture? The Jetsons, obviously, is the first thing that comes to mind for most people. Honestly, people that are really into modernist architecture hate the fact that it always is referred to as Jetsons architecture, but I don't really mind that because I think Jetsons are pretty cool. But what's interesting about what it encapsulates is, the Jetsons were in this sort of style of architecture. It was all about the future. It says a lot about things. It's all about optimism, and it was a very brief period after World War II when everybody thought that anything was possible, right? Better living through architecture, better living through science. Throw out all the old traditional ways of living, and let's live in glass houses in the sky, right? With your jetpacks and your flying cars, which I'm still waiting for. And that kind of captivated the imagination of everybody. You saw it in advertising, like this ad for a Motorola. I think they were advertising that ugly stereo cabinet in the back, but the picture itself is pretty cool. And then you'd see this in every magazine, like Popular Science and everything. The new worlds are possible, new cities are possible. Anything is possible at this point. You're going to zip around cities with no traffic jams, right? In your personal cars and your hovercraft and everything else. And eventually, architects started following suit. So this is called the Monsanto House of Tomorrow. It was at Disneyland. It was a major attraction at Disneyland. You get to tour the house and see how you would be living shortly in the future. They had things like dishwashers and TVs. Soon, entire cities started getting built that way. So this is Brasilia, which was the new capital city of Brazil. Brazil decided they needed a new capital city to represent their future and how things were going to be in the world. So they went full Jetsons, as you can tell. This is Oscar Niemeyer, who designed the whole city from scratch. New world city, new world country needs a new capital. Australia followed suit the same way, right? Of course, Australia did it kind of in a little more conservative way, because they're Australians after all. It's not, we're not Brazilians. Let's not get too crazy here. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's calm things down a little bit. Calm your shit down. But that said, they did build some kind of crazy stuff. This one was derided by most Canberrans and Australians in general as the Martian embassy. It is kind of Jetsons-like, I have to give them that, but I think it's pretty cool. It's actually one of my favorite buildings here. What's interesting is whereas most Canberrans might either ignore it or hate it or make fun of it, people in the rest of the world actually are interested in this building and everything else in Canberra. The rest of the world is paying attention to what's here and has been for quite some time. So this is a photo of people looking at Canberra architecture in a conference in 2012 in Palm Springs, of all places. So think about that. The rest of the world is watching, even if you're not. Speaking of Palm Springs, and I live in California, I'm active in the Palm Springs community. I give lectures and tours there every year, and I know the owner of this house. This is a famous house in Palm Springs. It's called the Menrad House. It's one of the most photographed houses in the country, probably, and certainly in Palm Springs. People from Australia fly all the way out there just to get their photograph in front of this house. It's known as a butterfly roof house. You could probably figure out why. The funny thing is, though, is that you don't really have to fly from Canberra or from Australia all the way to Palm Springs to see a house like this, because you've got one in Yarralumla. You've actually got quite a few of them around town. This is one of my favorite examples because it's just so perfect and it's intact. So the point is that you do have a lot of great stuff here. The one in Palm Springs has tour buses going in front of it all the time. It drives the owner nuts. I've never seen a tour bus in front of this one. This is the interior of a house just next door, just down the street from the one that I just showed you. Same architect designed this one. I've stayed here myself. I've known Australians that have stayed here, listed this, it's on Airbnb, and they've actually stayed here just to live in the Palm Springs lifestyle. They could have just gone to Red Hill. Save them a trip. This is also Palm Springs. This is City Hall by the famous architect Albert Frey. This is Red Hill, again, same house as the previous interior, by the famous architect Robin Boyd. Here's a modernist interpretation of a Greek temple. This is kind of a well-known building in Los Angeles. You don't have to go to Los Angeles or Pasadena in this case to see it, because you've got one right across the lake. Another example, Louis Kahn, the famous architect Louis Kahn, designed this the Yale Museum of Art in New Haven, Connecticut. But you've got something very similar right here in town, right? The NGA. I actually think this one's cooler, personally, but if I'm at home, I'm never going to admit that I just said that. In Montreal, this building was one of the first things that sparked my interest in modernism. I love modernism. Part of the reason why is because it gives me butterflies when I see a really cool building, and I try to capture that in my photos. This is called Habitat. It was designed for the World's Fair in 1967 by Moshe Safdie. This is right here, you see, right in Canberra. This is student housing. This was designed. Granted, it might not be as cool as this, but it's pretty cool. Come on. But I understand the students don't like living there, but who cares? It still looks cool, right? But anyway, this was designed by John Andrews, who was an Australian architect who trained in Harvard and also in Canada and learned his craft there, and then came back to Australia. This is in Vancouver, Canada. This is by a famous architect named Arthur Erickson, the law courts there. However, what's interesting about this is that he was directly influenced by John Andrews, the previous architect, when they saw this building. So that should tell you something. Canberra people are paying attention to what's going on here, even if Canberrans are trying to tear them down, like this one. Googie architecture is kind of emblematic of Los Angeles, which is the space age, kind of Jetsons-like architecture, right? You guys have your share here, too. Another example of Googie architecture is the Seattle Space Needle. Well, you know where I'm going to go with this, right? Yes, Telecom Tower. I called it Telecom Tower, not Telstra Tower. Do I get like honorary local points for that? Boston is known for its Bauhaus-inspired architecture. This is the house of Walter Gropius, who founded the Bauhaus in Germany. Then the bad guys came into power and he had to leave. So he built this here, and he was at Harvard for a while. Just founded the School of Architecture there. You guys have a lot of Bauhaus-inspired architecture here as well, like this one in Deakin. So I guess the point of it, all of that, was just to say, to quote Thoreau, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. A lot of my experience as Canberrans have been kind of blind to what's around them. They don't notice it. Maybe it's because they're locals, they grew up with it, so they don't see it anymore. But just paying attention to what you've got makes all the difference, and looking at it maybe a little differently than you would normally. So a couple of examples. These aren't in Canberra for the most part, but this is just a house that I photographed once really badly, and then I came back and photographed it in the right light, and looked at it and framed it differently. This is a library that I photographed also pretty badly. And then came back in the right light and look at it differently. This is a bank in Palm Springs, also fairly well known. It's okay, but that photo is also kind of crappy. I can say that since it's my photo. But this, look at it differently. Look at it in a way that frames the thing that is most interesting about it. This is, it's a nice view, but you can't really tell the building that much because the sun's in the wrong place, it's not lit the right way. Come back and look at it when it's the right time of day. This building in Paris by Le Corbusier, it's one of the first modernist buildings in the world at my alma mater, the University of Paris. Photograph it in a way, look at it in a way that emphasizes the thing that's interesting about it. But most often what tends to happen is we see, as soon as a building gets built, things get built up around it. We put car parks in front of it, and you put up really shitty signs, in front of it, and light poles and utility boxes, and you tend to lose what the architect was trying to say, the message the architect was trying to convey, with all of the crap that gets accumulated around it, almost immediately after it's built, but especially over the years. But what happens if you take all that stuff away? Want to say that again? There. You can see a little more clearly. So what I'm trying to say is, try to train your eye to look past all that stuff and at the building itself. I do that all the time. I drive people nuts because I'll slam on the brakes and just stare at a building. And I haven't caused a traffic jam yet, but anyway. Look at this building here. It's just a car park in a building in a city in Portland. Look at it in the way the architect drew it. And then strip all the crap away. This is right here in Canberra. I actually thought these buildings were gone because I couldn't find them for a long time. It turns out they're still there, but they've just been pasted over. So they were inspired by Bauhaus, but now look at what they look like. It's just right across the street over here. They've been coated in a layer of stucco. This building, the cinema, over in Civic on the other side, I also thought this one was gone. It wasn't. It turns out they just painted it beige. They made it try to disappear. Let's make it, that's too crazy. Let's just try to tame this down a little bit. This building they were so proud of, they made a postcard at one point. In fact, Canberrans, this used to be the tallest building in Canberra, and there was an observation deck. Anybody visiting Canberra would have to go up there and see it. They painted that beige, too. That's right across the street, by the way. I'll bet you didn't notice it, though. Look at the overhangs on this building. This is in Torrens. This is the shops in Torrens. See what the architect did is they were thinking about the shadows when they did it and the pattern that would form on the ground. Not anymore. I guess the beams started rotting, so they just got rid of them. Didn't replace them, they just get rid of them. It's cheaper that way, right? Look at this one here. You probably all recognize this, the law courts of ACT. Yunkin Freeman. I love this building. I love the sculpture in front of it, too. But now it looks like the sculpture's crying, doesn't it? It's just like, oh, God, these idiots. Anyway, sorry. You're not supposed to insult your host, so that's awkward. This is the old archives building in Mitchell. It's been emptied. It's probably threatened now, unfortunately. But it's a beautiful building. I was stunned to find this when I was just driving around. My favorite building is this is in Woden, the old TAFE. It was ACT offices then, and now it's slowly getting abandoned. Death by neglect, right? You can see it hasn't been cleaned or taken care of in a while. They're probably waiting for it to get so run down, people ask them to tear it down. This building is definitely getting torn down. It's just across the Civic on the other side. And there's a big billboard on the side of it advertising the boring apartment building that's going to be put there instead. You probably all recognize this one, Bruce Hall. We just lost this one, despite a fight to keep it. They like to claim asbestos is the most famous, popular one around here to use as an excuse to tear it down when they want to tear it down for other reasons. These buildings here are probably the most intact street in Civic, over on West Civic on University. I love them, but I know people that go to the cupping room for breakfast and they've never noticed the building it's in. They didn't even recognize this photo. It looks a lot like a sculpture to me, like Donald Judd sculpture. Although they wouldn't hesitate to tear that down, and this is worth millions, so they probably wouldn't tear that down. Right across the street, another view. And then look at this one. Again, this reminds me of a sculpture. A lot of these were designed to look like works of art. This one, what does this remind you of? To me, it looks like a Mondrian painting. So I guess in closing, I would say let's enjoy what we have. Take another look at these things. So I put up a few photos more that I've taken, just to close out on a high note instead of being a downer. But not just the famous buildings, because everybody certainly recognizes the High Court, and the inside is beautiful. If you've never been inside, it's definitely worth a look, especially in the right time of day when the light's great. And then, next door, same architects designed the NGA. I love this building too. And then the Carillion, of course, everybody knows about these buildings, and they're probably not threatened. But there are other buildings that are equally cool and that nobody seems to notice or care about. And I would just encourage everybody to take a look at those too. Like this little modest church in Yarlumla, which looks like a Harry Seidler building. It's not. Or this one, which is also probably threatened. It looks pretty like they're emptying it out. This is by Robin Boyd, famous architect. Beautiful pond in the courtyard. Way too efficient now because like 80% of the land is occupied by a pond instead of the building itself. So that's probably threatened. These buildings here by Enrico Taglieri, great architect who very much inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright in organic architecture. Another one over in Mitchell by the same architect, as you can probably tell. Another one by the same architect, the much loved and hated Dixon Library. But look at the gardens in there and the courtyard and the fountains. It's amazing. I just love it. Probably recognize this one, right? I hope, please. It's right outside. This David Jones even the David Jones is great. And then, and more sculptures. So a lot of these buildings were designed to be like sculptures, to be art, and to play off light and shadow throughout the day. So take a look at them at different times of day and watch how the light changes them. They will change completely in front of your eyes. It's quite fascinating. So all I would ask is, just take another look at the city and be proud of what you've got. Preserve what you've got. Let Canberra keep its sense of self, its sense of place, and its soul. Thank you.